Welcome back, everybody. President Trump getting ready for the G20 summit this week in Hamburg, Germany, where he will have his first face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The White House now calling it a, quote, normal bilateral meeting. A Russian official saying the meeting is crucial. The big question is whether the president will bring up Russian interference in the U.S. election. So let's get into this. Joining me now is Mackowiak, a Republican strategist. He is the president of the Potomac Strategy Group, and Chris Kofinas, a Democratic strategist and the former chief of staff for Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Welcome to you both. Matt, I'm going to start with you. The Trump-Putin meeting, what are the odds he brings up Russia's interference and the U.S. elections? And the president's critics here, they want him to take a tougher tone toward Moscow and send a message. But do you think he's going to?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's obviously one that the media will be very focused on over the rest of this week. I would like to see him bring it up. You obviously have Congress taking steps to pass sanctions against Russia, new sanctions against Russia for their interference in our election. But I would also say it's a very full agenda. Obviously, a political settlement or solution in Syria would be on the table. I would hope the president would bring up our commitment to NATO. A lot of our Eastern European allies are very concerned about Russia's aggression in the last few years. So there's a lot to talk about, but certainly Russia's interference into our election is something that I hope President Trump does bring up, and that'll be something that the media will focus on to a great extent.
Chris, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said there's no specific agenda for this Trump-Putin meeting. You heard Steve Clemons earlier in the show saying that he thinks it's a bad idea for President Trump to wing this meeting. You think about Putin's background. Former KGB here, you know how calculated he really is. You think it's a good idea to just wing it, to have no specific agenda? And by the way, do you even buy it? Do you buy that there's no specific agenda to this meeting and how it's going to go down?
I'm not sure what I buy anymore when it comes to this administration. I mean, sometimes it's hard to believe, you know what is reality and what is not. In terms of there not being an agenda, that's kind of stunning if you think about it. That there's at least not a set group of topics that they want to address in the first bilateral meeting between a U.S. president and the Russian president. I think in about 2 years. So that I think is should raise red flags. In terms of President Trump raising the Russian interference in the election, I don't believe he's going to do it, and it will be to his detriment if it doesn't, because it will be literally the thing that everyone will talk about if they don't address it. And I think this again speaks to more of the optics of this president. I think he loves the idea of basically standing next to Putin and kind of poking his finger in the eye of his critics, saying, I don't care what you all say, I can do what I want. Is basically the modus operandi of his presidency from the beginning. I don't see how it's going to change.
Well, and Chris, if I was advising the president, and by the way, I've never advised a president in my life, I'm just a journalist, strategically I would say, hey, you're going to want to bring that up, especially if one wants to distance themselves from the Russia investigation. Do you think that's even a thought there, or am I kind of coming from left field with that?
Well, no. If you're thinking strategically, yes. If you're thinking in terms of tweets, no. And again, I think this is the dilemma that President Trump, his administration, find themselves in. I have no doubt that some of his advisors will be probably saying, "We've got to bring it up. We've got to bring it up. We've got to bring it up." Yeah. Then he will be sitting there in that moment, and he will not bring it up.
Yeah, not only would I want to bring it up, I would make sure someone was typing it down. Matt, President Trump coming to the G20 summit, kind of as the odd man out, especially when it comes to the Paris Climate Accord, stepping away from that. Want to take a listen, want to remind everybody President Trump's announcement in the Rose Garden, and then we'll talk.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, but begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction on terms that are fair to the United States, its businesses, its workers, its people, its taxpayers. So we're getting out.
So this announcement obviously coming after the G7 when we saw when we saw President Trump meeting with all those other world leaders. Now we have German Chancellor Angela Merkel promising to combat climate change, as we have seen, and said that these will not be easy talks, of course referring to her talks with the President of the United States. The difference is they are obvious, and it would be wrong to pretend they are not there. So how do you think Matt, how do you think that President Trump is going to handle his differences with Chancellor Merkel?
Yeah, it's another great question. Germany's hosting this G20 summit. Germany has national elections later this year, and Merkel is in, I think, some danger. So standing up to Trump will be good domestic politics for her in her home country. Obviously, there's a pretty strong disagreement between President Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord and the views of many of our European allies. And so the president did say that he would be willing to renegotiate Paris. Now, I think we all know that would be very difficult to do, but we'll see whether that comes up.
Not to cut in here, Matt, but he said they would renegotiate, but then we literally heard hours later that many of the countries saying there's no negotiation. It is what it is.
Sure, and this took several years for the Obama administration to negotiate. And any time you have an agreement that has that many parties, you cannot probably renegotiate it because everyone has something they don't like. But I think domestic politics in the United States dictated to President Trump after he made this promise to his voters and to the country as a candidate that he would pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. He's thinking about the American economy, certainly in the short term, the medium term, and that's what that Paris decision was about. That will be one difficult subject that will come up during the G20. There will be others as well. That there's a lot on the agenda. North Korea, Syria, NATO. There's a lot to talk about, and it's going to be a very important meeting.
You know, I can't let you guys go without talking about the tweets that we've been covering for the last couple of weeks or so.
Which
Marty,
one?
What? Which one?
Which one?
Well, let's talk about the most recent controversial tweet from over the weekend when you saw sort of President Trump, I guess, from his body slamming basically with the CNN logo on the face of someone from his wrestling days, shall we say. So this is a U.S. president, a sitting U.S. president, going to the G20 summit with so much controversy about his tweets, something that we have never seen before. How do you think that's going to affect the conversations with these world leaders that he's going to be having? And let's not forget, this is not something new. So he's already gone to these places and already had some of these conversations with these controversies behind him. And by the way, before it hasn't really seemed to affect much. But do you think things have changed?
Well, I mean, what I will say is that President Trump clearly does this on purpose. He does this on purpose because he loves to pick a fight with the media, to distract everyone from the litany of failures and lack of accomplishments that the American people should be focusing on. It's hard to distract them when you're basically suggesting violence to the media. So I think, again, he does this when he's in a corner, he's unable to or unwilling to address a specific issue. So I have a feeling this will not be the last tweet we will talk about. It will not be even close to the last tweet we will talk about.
Yeah, I'm going to take you up on that. I think you might be right there. Matt Mackowiak and Chris Kofinas, thank you both for joining me. Happy 4th.